Good morning, I'm Nikki and I'm here today at the Udder House in South Kensington to launch the Giant Leap podcast in conversations with, and I'll be speaking to leading luminaries from the luxury and finance marketing sector, and we'll be finding out how the current landscape of social, technological, economic and political upheaval is affecting our industry today. Let's go inside and have a look.
Hi, I'm Kate Forsyth. I'm Deputy Chief Investment Officer of Hundle, which is a multi-family office working in London. What do? We help families steward wealth across generations.
Hello and welcome to this Giant Leap podcast in Conversations with. I'm Nikki McMorrow and I'm here with Kate Forsyth from Hundle. Hi Kate.
Hi, thank you very much for having me.
You are welcome, very welcome here. Could you just let our audience know what Hundle is? It's a family office, but I think that we all need to know what that is.
Sure, I completely appreciate finance as a landscape is quite complex, and within that, family offices are almost a black box. So I think in simple terms, they started about 100 years ago with the Rockefeller family, who wanted a company that it was built just to help them solve any problem that they would have. And most of those were financial. How can they save money? How can they provide for future generations? And that's what family offices have been through the years. And really, it's a very personal, kind of deeply human entity that tries to service families however they need. I think today, what's very different is that it goes just beyond finance now to also, well-being and legacy and building kind of not just financial capital, but also cultural capital. And for every client that looks different. And my job as part of a family office is to work out, what do they need and how can I help them achieve their goals?
Amazing. Okay. And so, and what is your job at Hundle?
Yes. So I am our Deputy Chief Investment Officer,
okay,
which is a long title, which essentially means I help run our investment team. So I provide the financial solutions, things like portfolios for them to save money and invest and grow through time. And they can be very traditional investments, but I also try and steward them into the more kind of passion assets as well. So alternative things, whiskey, art, wine, assets that might mean something more to them and that they want to build for their children, a legacy that's different from just a kind of pot of savings. So I cover almost everything that is to do with investing any money.
How fascinating.
Yes.
Great. Wow. So how did you end up in this?
It's actually very straightforward. I've always wanted to work in finance, which I think is a really odd dream for a child to have when most of them say chef or kind of ballet dancer. But my family have all worked in finance, and my parents, uncles, aunts, my grandparents. And so it was very much the place for me. An investment I love because you get paid to be good at general knowledge. And I think that is such a glorious privilege every day. And so I applied straight out of university to a very big financial services firm. It was too big, too corporate. And so I joined a smaller firm where I spent 8 years learning and growing. And I then left to join Hundle because something was missing. And it was a real kind of eureka moment for me where I felt, I think finance gets a bad rep for being quite boring, but you do make a difference and you can make a difference. You're responsible for so much money, and you are the person that will steward that to good causes and to impactful things. And the firm I was in before was a bit more rigid in what they would allow. And so I met a few different companies, and then I found Hundle. The clients are lovely, and the flexibility that the firm offers to basically solve via any method that you can with any asset, with any kind of creative solution, that just resonated hugely with me. And it's been, a great choice in hindsight. I'm very happy.
Fantastic. It really does bring it to life, because I think for a lot of people, they just think finance and then, crumble.
I can't tell you the amount of times that I meet someone and they ask what I do, and their eyes just glaze over. And that's okay, I understand. But, I genuinely care about this industry and making a difference.
money facilitates everything.
Everything.
So if you're using it to do the right things, it can be super interesting.
And I think, when you think about doctors and, people in these positions where they have a big duty of care, so do I. Money is exactly what you said. It's this big facilitator. It allows people to live and live well. And I feel the weight of that responsibility very deeply. And I think the past few decades, we think about what it used to be like, this era of frivolous kind of taking advantage of clients, that's something that the finance industry has to pay for and has to learn from. And what I observe is a lot of us and a lot of firms that feel the weight of those mistakes and are trying to be better.
Yeah. What kind of mistakes, just so the audience can understand?
Even you think about things like the financial crisis in 2008, that happened, and there's a long, boring explanation, but it essentially happened because a lot of people at big banks got very greedy and started, making money from nothing. And you can't do that. And the result was a lot of people paid the price. A big recession that was very painful for many people, lots of unemployment. And I think as an industry, that's been a huge learning point, that the impact that financial services can have on the whole economy is massive. And so I think we are stewards, and we have a responsibility, not just to clients that we deal with directly, but to everybody to just be better.
Yeah, because if you think about, and I don't always think about this, but you're talking and it's making me think about, finance and investments. You think about things, but it's also people's businesses.
Their livelihoods, everything.
Founders, startups, opportunities, everything that everybody does. Does Hundle also help clients to invest in an angel way as well?
Yes. So as part of, in terms of asset classes that people think about, you have traditional things like stocks and shares and bonds, but private equity, venture capital, private credit, wine, whiskey, all of these things are within our remit. And I think that's right, because people care about more than just traditional assets, and we're trying to reflect their desires in what we can offer.
Amazing. And so is Hundle a single family office or a multi-family office? And what's the difference?
Sure. I'll start with the difference. So a single family office does what it says on the tin. It looks after one family. And to do that, it's really a product of size. So the very large families with sort of close to billion or billions of assets would traditionally use their own firm. They can personalise it.
So that's like the Rockefellers that you mentioned.
Exactly.
Or like Succession, the programme.
Exactly that. Perfect examples. A multi-family office, which is what we are, really tries to open the doorway so that lots of smaller families can pool together and still benefit from that personalisation, the client service, all the things that perhaps you don't find elsewhere. And, why don't you find it elsewhere is the question I think people ask. What's the point of a family office? Because a lot of people are very time poor. And so those services exist, but they don't want to have to go to 5 different people to get them, a lawyer, an accountant, a tax planner, someone to help you invest, lathe weights to buy wine and bond. They want someone that will just do it all for them and do it well. And so that's really the point of a multifamily office. You can service lots of people, service them well, and give them one focal point for them to rely on. It's about being a trusted advisor. That's what we call ourselves.
And what's that sort of level at which people go from a multi to a single family office? And what's the minimum
for a multi as well?
Hundle to get involved?
Every family office is different. Where we operate, there's no hard limits. Probably around the kind of 5 million mark and up, you can become a client, access some of the services. The issue is really the more money you have, the more you can do with it. So there's no hard rule on our side. It's just more, what are you looking to achieve, and can we help you do that? To go to a single family office, you could probably do it with sort of 500 million of assets under management. But these things are expensive, and they're difficult and burdensome from an operational perspective. So I think it's very personal to each family. Also privacy. Privacy is very important, and so it's often not about the amount of money they have. It's about not wanting to share, and about wanting to kind of retain that sense of, this is my family office just for me.
Yeah. So what goes on in the family office stays in the family office.
Exactly. and that's why, to be honest, every family office is so different, and so many people just have no idea. And that's because no one really has any idea, and that's how families want it to stay.
So you mentioned how things have changed quite a lot over the years, from the Rockefeller days to maybe the 80s when, you know, what was going on in the 80s?
I think it's just this idea of finance kind of growing up and becoming more sophisticated. And I went to see the Lehman trilogy recently, which is such a really interesting, you know, it's 3 hours long, history of finance. And it really eloquently shows that, you know, as people discovered these new asset classes and as people ended up kind of becoming wealthier, they got excited. And I think family offices were caught up in that with everyone else in finance. You know, you had the big kind of dot-com bubble and the financial crisis I mentioned earlier. These are essentially products of bad behaviors in financial services. And there's much more awareness today, certainly the way that I see it, recognition that you have to be sustainable in the way you invest. You're not trying to take clients for all their money up front. You know, that's not how you build relationships. It's about giving people what they want and what they need, not what you think they need. And so I think that's the biggest change is putting the client first and genuinely meaning it.
Yeah.
Whereas before, lack of knowledge meant you could get away with trying to kind of sell people things that maybe they didn't need.
Yeah. Also, I think, is it true that generally speaking, the wealthy people who have the money are more, like, actually care more about the balance in which that money gets invested, and they want to have a certain percent that goes on to sustainable things, and they need to have some family heirlooms, but also, you know, the portfolio. Are they more?
Yes, I think that's really true. And I think actually it's not even kind of about the quantum of money that you have. From what I see, you know, post the kind of Second World War period, and then we had periods of instability in Europe as well, we've had this kind of 40-year peace dividend, and that's allowed people to get comfortable with going beyond just financial security. They now look outwards and think, well, how can I make a difference? And that's really what I observe at the moment is people thinking, well, I have all this money. I don't want to just put it away for my family. I don't want a legacy that is how much I left to my kids after I die. I want a legacy that's how I impacted things positively. How did I support, you know, for me personally, like women in wealth and accessibility, and how did I support inequality, and how did I help reduce the impacts of climate change, and all of these positive things. And we call that kind of cultural capital. So financial capital is important, but it's much more about cultural capital today, and it's a really lovely thing to watch.
I think maybe what's driving it as well is this ultra visibility that we never used to have. You know, we could go out in the 90s and there were no mobile phones, no social media, but it's more than that. But now everything is documented. So
definitely
you could leave your grandchildren a wonderful legacy that makes them welcome in all the circles they need to move in, or you could, you know, be a slur on their name. Is it partly to do with that as well?
I think so. You know, I think a lot of the kind of visibility point, and with the kind of rise of social media, everyone's so connected now. You can see problems and feel problems, and it's much more kind of emotive as a, I suppose, as a, what's the right word? It's an emotive world that we live in, and it's very hard to separate yourself from that. And so I think it's completely natural to want to change it. And if you have money to do that, you know, I very much see that coming through in the trends. And it's, I think it's very important to us. You know, we want to leave the world. It's fanciful, but you want to leave the world a better place. And with, I think, especially the last kind of few years, we've moved back into this space of geopolitical tension and negativity. And, you know, today as we record, the Trump tariffs have been a huge shock to everybody because it's something that we haven't seen since the 1930s, that level of protectionism in trade. It's so different from this world of globalization that we're used to. And so I think there's a generational push to kind of keep the peace and keep that connectivity. And I observe it within generations as well. You know, it's something we haven't talked about is what's the attitude of parents versus children. And children are so keen on this idea of impact and legacy because they have grown up in this world of social media. Yeah. And that's definitely a trend that we see. The
consequences of your actions, they know it.
More than anything, cancel culture, all of this, you know, it just makes it a different world for them than one I grew up in, my parents grew up in. But I think if the result of that is a call to positive action, then it's a great outcome.
Just dwelling on the tariffs for a moment, because it's so current, it's happening today.
Yes.
What's the outcome of something like that within the family office? Like, does it cause a mad scramble of families trying to like adjust their portfolio? Like, what's the story?
Yes and no. So families are just like, we're all human. Everyone's human. And so people have different abilities to tolerate uncertainty. And so I have some clients who it doesn't really matter to them at all. And I send them an update and they're probably somewhere gloriously warm around the world, enjoying themselves on a beach, and they just don't care. They're long-term investors and they look through the noise. And then I have other clients who feel these things very deeply and they are nervous. And I think, even if you are a long-term investor, I'm nervous. We should all be nervous. This is the signs that the world that we're used to is changing. We've lived through 20 years of stability of inflation and stability of economic growth, and we've been punctuated by a few big market events, but it's been quite a benign environment for people, and that's very easy to accumulate wealth in. It was for our parents, you buy a house, it goes up in value. That's what houses do. And there's a whole generation of investors out there who don't know that markets can go down, and that's quite scary. So I think today, you should be nervous because it's ushering in the way that we see it, a very different regime. And, we've probably had 2 or 3 of these styles of events in the last 100 years when we moved kind of from the gold standard in the kind of early 1900s and then through to kind of, it's a very long history lesson, but essentially through to when we broke with the US dollar and currencies began to move freely. We've got one of these big regime changing moments today with the tariffs and with Donald Trump's election, and even with the kind of as far back as the invasion into Ukraine. This is different. This is meaningful and it matters. And I think investors and families and people need to kind of take note that we could be up for a few decades of uncertainty, and that is scary.
And requires different behaviour, which requires stewardship. Yeah. So everything comes back to the family office.
I think so. Well, yeah. and just partners that you can trust, trusted advisors, be they family offices or whoever that you can rely on. I think seeking sound advice from someone that's looking forward at the world as it is, not the world as it was, is really important.
Yeah. I just want to touch as well on, you mentioned the women working in wealth. And this is quite a passion point for you, I think.
Yes.
So, can you give us a little overview of what's it like being a woman working in wealth? What percentage of people in the wealth industry are women? And what's your take on women in wealth?
I probably have a broadly more balanced take. I think it's easy to kind of play that victim card of, there's no women in wealth and we're very hard done by. I take the opposite approach. I think I work hard, we all work hard, and I think people are awarded positions based on merit. And I have certainly never felt that anything I've achieved in my career has been on anything less than merit. I've never experienced explicitly being gender-based, and that's really, probably different to the way that it would have been a few years ago. There were explicit biases, I think, where women maybe didn't advance as quickly. I think that's changing. I think it has changed, and it's really wonderful. And the number of kind of female CEOs, I don't have the exact figures, but I mean, you can just literally look in the paper and there's so many more powerful women running family offices, running Forbes 500 companies. In my own firm, we're more than 50% female. In my previous firm, we had a female CEO, female fund managers. And so I think it's something that where there are more and more women like myself who come up into these senior positions, we perpetuate that positive behavior, the mentorship, and I see real positive changes. And I love that because I think our clients are changing as well. I think there was a study the other day that said by 2025, over 60% of national UK wealth will be held by women. That's amazing. But women have different priorities and they want to have different conversations. It's not just about, as we talked about, maximizing profit. For them, it's about impact and education and family. And so I think having women in positions of power that can have those conversations with them and really relate is really beautiful, and it makes for a very productive relationship.
And your firm being 50% women, I mean, what sort of, and you mentioned 60% of wealth will be owned by women, but what currently is the mix of gender within the client base of Hundle?
So the client base, we have a lot of married couples, and I think it's fair to say that most of the relationships were driven by the husband predominantly. That has changed in the last few years. So I have 3 relationships now, which are purely led by the wife, which is lovely. They actually tend to be much harder at the questioning than their husbands are. So they put me under the grill, which is great. I love it. And then on the institutional side, which is not necessarily families, that's kind of pension funds and things that we also do look after. I still see a predominance of men on investment committees in these very formal positions. And I think, that's still 80-20 male-female as I observe it. And that needs to change. But I think it is changing.
But it's amazing how fast these things are changing as well. And we're throwing out a lot of stats here, but I think in ultra high net worth, it's about 12% women.
Wow.
Globally.
Yeah.
So I think Hundle is quite advanced in the sense that it's attracting more women. And I
think so.
I think the stats are quite clear as well. When women control wealth, good things happen.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about those?
Yeah, I think it's what I alluded to. They have different priorities. Once they have the money and once they control it, I think especially where it's inherited, there's a view to becoming kind of worthy of those assets. And that means, it means impact investing, philanthropic investing, donations. So there's things called a DAF, it's a donor advised fund. It's essentially a vehicle that families can set up to donate to charities of their choosing. These are really popular with families nowadays. They don't just want to give to any charity. They want to be involved in the charities they give to. And we work with them on that. We can shortlist charities by interests and things. And this is very much kind of the female element to it, where I think they want to feel like they're making a difference. They didn't just inherit this and spend it. They inherit it and they use it to do good.
I think as well, because you talk a lot about appreciation in both the financial and the human sense, appreciating things, and women will appreciate different kinds of assets, the coloured diamonds, maybe the wine more than the whiskey. Maybe I'm being biased, but
no, I think that's
must
right.
have an outcome for like which industries are rising and falling.
I think, I've not considered that properly, but actually when I look at it, I think you are right. Art particularly is an area that, and maybe we are self-selecting as a firm, but we work with a lot of female artists and we sponsor a gallery nearby and it's exclusively showing female artists in Mayfair. And I think art is something that has deep significance on a personal level, and it doesn't mean that men also don't resonate with it, but certainly we see a lot of women that show interest in kind of how they can be involved from an investment point of view. And we haven't touched on it, but something that's really interesting is this idea of kind of tokenization of investments. And what that really means is taking something like a fine masterpiece and splitting it up so that lots and lots of people can own a piece of it. That's something that's getting really popular because it brings down the barriers to an asset class that was completely inaccessible before. And so I think art is definitely something that I see a lot of interest, particularly from our female investors.
Are there some really super famous paintings, for example, that are fractionally owned?
There is. So I think one of the first ones was a Picasso, which has a French name that I will not try and pronounce because I would butcher it. But yes, there are some famous pieces of art. And you might remember there was a whole wave of kind of frenzy a few years ago with these non-fungible tokens, NFTs, which is essentially fractionalizing art. And that was, by an extent, possibly a bit of a bubble, and I think that's come back a bit now. But what they were trying to achieve from that is really interesting. You are just making something that used to be completely infungible accessible to people. And we're seeing it in whiskey, we're seeing it in wine. So a couple of firms that we work with have distilleries in Scotland, and they'll release whiskey in cask, and that cask will be fractionalized. So you can own a token that gives you the right to a bit of that cask or That's so interesting. And as you buy it, what you get access to is not just the asset, but the experience. So you can go and visit the distillery and take your children and introduce them to the hobby or the passion that you have. These are the sorts of things that I think make a difference that family offices can do. Traditional investment houses wouldn't tend to operate in these spaces.
Yeah. Talking of tokenizing whiskey, I saw this program, Hunting the Whiskey Bandits. Have you heard of this?
No, tell me more.
They were basically saying that in the rise of the ability to tokenize these assets that you can buy that you might never see because it's actually about the storage of it in the perfect place. So you buy some whiskey,
yes.
It doesn't get delivered to your home. You get the certificate to say that you own it. But that some companies were selling non-existent casks.
Kind of fraud.
So how does a family office do the due diligence to ensure that they're not investing in those kinds of schemes?
Yes, that's a great question. And I think that's the risk with all of these sorts of tokenization and NFTs as well. You have to have that intermediary that you can trust to do it on your behalf. So we carry out due diligence on anything we invest in. So we have the skill set, we have the programs, and we kind of have the knowledge and the skills. So it's basic things like a site visit. You need to have the pull to be able to say, we're coming up, show me exactly what I'm investing in. We get financials of the firm, backgrounds, we get third-party reference checks, the sorts of things that as an individual retail investor, maybe giving them a couple of £100, no one will give you that kind of time of day. And so that's one of the real benefits of going through someone like a family office, because they do the hard work for you. And that is the idea of kind of sitting in the middle as trusted advisor.
So buying power, really. It's the same if we're working with a media company.
Exactly.
The more media we buy, the more power we have, the more we can get them to give us the perks.
Yeah. And then you can trust what you're buying.
But actually, the more the consumer is asking for involvement as well, I guess, seeing is believing. And if you go and have a visit and take your kids and have the tour, it's pretty clear that it's...
And I think ultimately the big problem with any emerging asset class is regulation, and it's just not properly regulated yet, but it will be. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of this, I guess, falls into the bucket of cryptocurrency adjacent in terms of tokens. Yeah. There's so much in the press about regulation coming down the pipeline. And so I think it's great. It's all positive.
Yeah. We were talking about whiskey. I don't really like whiskey, but I much prefer wine.
Yes.
How is it working with wine investments? Because,
so very similar. I think wine has been around in this way for a lot longer. So there's more infrastructure around it. So platforms and things, Wine5, for example. I think VinoVest. These are all platforms that are accessible to everybody. They've got great teams behind them. They're very big. There's lots of reviews on the internet that you can go and check and kind of see the robustness of the team behind it. And they build personalized portfolios of wine that you can either drink or not drink, depending on the company. Some of them you just buy it and you watch it a bit like a portfolio of stocks. Some of them you buy it and you can take it home and you can drink it. And so I think it depends. It's very personal, but there's lots out there that people can have a look at if they're interested.
Yeah. So we've covered quite a lot of these passion investments. Are there any others, where it's really about the heirloom, the legacy, and the enjoyment while you're alive?
Definitely. I think any sort of hard investment asset like jewelry, watches, cars, all of these fall into this category now. And I think we call them real assets. Real assets have been out of favor a little bit because traditional things like bonds and equities went up, and they went up so reliably, and they're so easy to buy and sell. You didn't really need to worry about diversifying. But because people care more, and because there's a lot more uncertainty and this idea of legacy, these are the assets that I think we're going to see more and more of in future. And as we talked about tokenization and technology, anytime these two kind of technology and assets pair up, you get this explosion in demand, which I think can be good, but you have to be wary if you're thinking about getting involved. Make sure you do the work, and we want to avoid those Ponzi schemes.
Absolutely. It's difficult to do a podcast these days without mentioning AI as well. how is AI transforming the family office landscape for you? Like, I suppose in the way that things are running internally, but also in the way that people are wanting to invest externally.
Let me take internal first. For me, I use it a lot. I find it really essentially like I've got 2 more investment analysts than I actually have. You know, AI is effective for drafting, for research. It's a sounding board. And I was so skeptical at first before I joined, when I was in a firm that had lots of resource and teams for people to rely on. But I think in smaller firms, even beyond family offices, in any industry, AI has been a huge efficiency and productivity tool for all of us. I don't think I'm alone in using it like that. Externally, I think from the way clients, you know, we're a very hands-on, client service-driven business, and I don't yet see AI really disrupting that. People like people, you know, they want that human resonance, and at the end of the day, I think the AI piece can maybe solve for a bit of a portfolio if you wanted to do something small, invest in a couple of stocks, and you say, well, hey, pick the best 5 technology stocks for me, ChatGPT, and it can do that. But it can't tell you how to wealth plan for 3 difficult children who don't get on, and it can't tell you how to pick a portfolio of balanced things across property and whiskey and wine and art and traditional assets, and it can't monitor them on an ongoing basis and doesn't build trust with you. So I think so far, not too much disruption on the client side.
And has it had an effect on families wanting to invest in, let's say, AI startups as well?
Definitely AI startups, and also just AI businesses in general, things like Tesla and Nvidia, and these are all something what we call meme stocks, is maybe a phrase that you've heard from the news. And meme because someone on a Reddit forum essentially picks them out as the next big winner, and then lots of people invest, and then it goes up and up and up, and then suddenly it stops going up. And I think something like Nvidia has been a real beneficiary of this. So from an investment perspective, it's been difficult because my job is to be a steward and be responsible, and I can see this company is going up way beyond its true sort of value. But clients like stories and hype, and it's hard to not get caught up in that. And I think that's really where it comes down to, you know, what's my job? And my job is to manage those behavioral biases and to take the other side of that mania when clients can't. So that's been difficult from an AI perspective. From the startup piece, I actually think it's really interesting, and there's a lot of good opportunity out there. I have a lot of entrepreneur clients who exit a business, and it might be in the technology space, and they want to help other founders like them, and they want to use their money to invest. And so we work with a number of small private equity firms and venture capitalist firms who have a bias to European technology or US technology. And it's about finding the right companies who are doing kind of a good job, because it's very easy in private equity to get caught up again in this kind of hype. And so you need to make sure that the firms that you work with, you do due diligence and all of this kind of usual things.
So we've talked a bit about how things have transformed over the past, but the point that we're at now is quite an unusual, volatile moment in history where everything could change and will change, but we just don't exactly know how. But there's definitely been a real, perhaps a rolling back of the liberal values that we've been talking about, and this desire to, like some people might call it woke, but, you know, this desire by families to want to do the right thing with their money. And then Trump comes along and is giving a voice to the other side, you know, who perhaps want to be more capitalist and want to be more protectionist and want to be more...
Definitely.
How do you... I don't even know, the question is so big, I don't even know how to vocalise it, but how do you feel about this?
I think that's completely accurate, and a lot of what we've talked about has been very much kind of others over self, and this idea of legacy and impact. I think the way that we observe it is this is never the full part of the portfolio for clients. This is part of the agenda, and it's an important part of the agenda, but there is still very much this focus, and possibly a growing focus going forward on preserving in the face of uncertainty. And so the kind of 20 years of peace that we've had have allowed these changes where people prioritize philanthropy over possibly performance. I think a really good example you can see in the kind of favored companies that people have been investing in. Everybody talked about, hydrogen and electric cars and all of these things that were great for the environment. And then as soon as, for example, Russia invaded Ukraine and energy prices went through the roof, suddenly it's, defense stocks and Shell, BP, oil, these are completely out of favor 10 years ago. And suddenly these are now the kind of leading investment performers over the last few years. That's a complete change.
That's really interesting, because you think as well about the hierarchy of needs.
Exactly.
And maybe we were at the top being actualized with
I actually think in exactly the same way.
And we've gone down one or two or perhaps 5 rungs.
And when the threat of the lights going out in your house become a proper reality, which they did for a lot of people in Europe, the UK as well, the government, who's got all these kind of zero carbon emission targets by 2030, suddenly is subsidizing energy companies because they can't have riots in the street. And so I think priorities, it's very easy to prioritize this idea of, I suppose, philanthropy and purpose when everything is fine. And so I think there's definitely, for me, an eye on the future as to what does that allocation look like going forward. And you can see in times of stress, people revert back to self and family and safety and security. And I don't think that means the end of the impactful investment that we've seen. There's still a whole generation, Generation Z has this very altruistic sense of how they want to be a part of society. But I think, there's absolutely going to be changes, and we're already seeing that. Yeah,
already seeing it. And, I daren't even say the name, but Andrew Tate, that the permission to have that voice, Gen Z has been having the voice of liberal, but the others maybe exist too. So I guess, what's the crystal ball? Where is it all going in the future? It's difficult to know, but I suppose it depends on some things, like how long. Well, Trump can only have one more term.
Yeah, not according to him.
True.
No, but theoretically, yes, he can only have one more term. I think, so ultimately I try and distill all of this because you can get overwhelmed. It would be completely natural as a person to have listened to this podcast and think, well, what am I meant to do? What does that mean for me? And I think I view my role as distilling all of that noise into something that you can take away long term. And so you have to control what you can control. I know the market's going to be volatile. I know that we're going to move into a period of more fractionalized global parties. So we're not going to be one peaceful planet. It's probably going to be East and West. Who knows? I can't control that. What I can control is build a solution for a family that accounts for volatility, accounts for uncertainty, and allows them to also feel connected to what we produce. And so I think it's these core of safe investments, so you can still rely on things like government bonds and gold, but then the passion piece overlaid on top of that, and then an encouragement just to ignore the noise. It's so easy to worry about what Donald Trump says on X every day, and the single biggest piece of advice I give to my clients is you are not investing for tomorrow, you're investing for 10 years' time and 20 years' time and for your children. So try just to let the noise wash over you.
Amazing. And actually, let's that's your audience, Hundle's customers.
Yes.
If we also think about the audience of this podcast who may not have the money, unfortunately, to come to Hundle, what would your advice be, from the one takeout from this conversation for this audience?
From financially or just generally?
You can do two.
Perfect. I think financially, try and, again, it comes back to the idea of noise. Try and not get swept up by kind of hype, market hype. And these are the sorts of things that, the temptation to invest in Bitcoin when it doubles or triples because your friend has invested in it. Anything that your friend has invested in that's gone up, don't buy that. it's something lighthearted to say, but generally I think it's a balanced portfolio with a trusted investment manager or a trusted firm that has a good long-term reputation. These exist. They're out there. I can't name them because they are competitors, but they're very good. And I think it's finding a partner that you can work with, and there's plenty of them that are in financial services. And then non-financially, I think it's trying to remember in the face of all of this separation and volatility that we all, I hope, want the same thing, which is a kind of more peaceful world, and to kind of go back to that sense of working together and trying not to get caught up in the conflict that I see all around at the moment. And that's my personal views.
So keep your head.
Keep your head.
Control what you can control, you say.
And control what you can control, and try and forget about what you can't.
Very good advice in all walks of life.
Exactly. Whether we follow it is another answer. If not,
it's easier to...
As we said at the beginning of the podcast, a glass of wine always helps.
I think you said a gallon of wine.
A gallon of wine. That's my personal cure.
Thank you so much for joining this podcast. This
Pleasure.
has been The Giant Leap in Conversations With, and this was Kate Forsyth from Hundle.